The sun scorched the Middle Eastern desert like a blazing sword from the heavens, and beneath that burning light, two names rose, two legends, two men from two opposing faiths. One, cloaked in the radiance of Allah, riding the wind from the burning sands of Egypt. The other, pale-skinned, hands wrapped in bandages, with eyes that never backed down. One was the war god of Islam. The other, the Leper King of Christianity. They never shook hands, never looked at each other as brothers. But still, they shared a destiny. Saladin, the one who united Egypt and Syria. They called him the Sword of God. Baldwin IV, a dying boy in a king's armor, but still strong enough to lift the cross and defy the world. This was not just a war. This was the final clash between faith and ambition, between belief and destiny, between Christianity and Islam. One side, the last light of Christian hope fading in the Holy Land. The other, an empire of Islam, rising like a storm in the middle of this chaos. Two souls, two symbols, charged at each other like lightning across the skies. This story is not a fairy tale. It is a prophecy, written in blood. It is history, carved into flesh. It is the final hymn of a dying age. This is the destined battle between Baldwin IV and Saladin, the final struggle between two civilizations and the very last breath of Christian Jerusalem. Baldwin IV was born in 1161 in the holy city of Jerusalem. He was the son of King Amalric I and Queen Agnes. From birth, he was destined to rule, a prince carrying the blood of kings. From a young age, Baldwin showed remarkable intelligence. He learned fast. He rode better than grown knights. And above all, he possessed a phenomenal memory. But there was something that deeply troubled his teacher. The boy never cried when he was hurt. No reaction, even when scratched or struck hard on the arm. The final diagnosis struck like a thunderclap across the heavens. Baldwin had leprosy, a death sentence with no cure, a curse that would rot his body slowly, a fate more cruel than any battlefield. In the 12th century, leprosy was not just a disease. It was a stain, a sign of uncleanness, a punishment from God, feared by both Christians and Muslims alike. The royal court of Jerusalem was shaken. How could the future king carry the curse of the outcast? And far across the desert, another child was growing up, not in a palace, but amidst sand and steel. His name was Saladin, born in Tikrit in the year 1137. He was not born of kings, not of royal blood, just a nephew to a general. In his youth, Saladin wasn't a warrior. In fact, he preferred books over battles. But War does not choose the willing. It chooses the relentless. Under the command of his uncle, Nur al-Din, Saladin learned the art of power. He joined campaigns from Syria to Egypt, and step by step, he climbed the ladder of the Islamic world. One was born to rule, yet crushed by illness. The other, born in obscurity, yet lifted by faith and fire. Two paths, slowly drawing together. When Baldwin took the crown at age 13, Jerusalem was in crisis. No one believed a sick boy could hold the throne. Relatives plotted to seize the regency. Meanwhile, in Egypt, Saladin was building a kingdom of his own, quietly. He removed rivals, generals, princes, one by one. In just 8 years, he conquered Egypt, crushed revolts in Syria, and founded a new empire, the Ayyubid dynasty. By then, Jerusalem, under Baldwin, was just a lonely fortress, surrounded by the rising storm of Islamic power. A sandstorm was coming, but Baldwin didn't run, didn't die in bed. The leper boy chose the battlefield, with his sword wrapped in white cloth, with his face veiled in silk, with a rotting body, but the heart of a king. Baldwin IV, the Leper King of Jerusalem, was ready for the first war of his life. Saladin, the warlord of Islam, was ready. He gathered 26,000 cavalry from Egypt, raising the banner of Allah, with a single command: erase Jerusalem, from Gaza to Jaffa, from Ramla to the Holy City. Christian lands burned red in the fire. Villages were torched. Civilians fled in chaos. Jerusalem was left with nothing but the sound of church bells, ringing in desperation. The situation had never been more dire. The main army of the Crusaders was far north, in Syria. Jerusalem was almost defenseless. Saladin knew this. He was so confident. He let his men rest along the way, split his forces to pillage the countryside. He believed there was no one left strong enough to stop him. But Saladin was wrong. In the ancient city of Ascalon, a sickly teenager was being wrapped in bandages by knights and gently lifted onto his horse. His eyes burned with light. Behind the veil, his left hand held a sword. His right arm was already paralyzed. This was Baldwin IV, the Leper King of Jerusalem, just 16 years old. At his side, only a few hundred knights, some from Ramla, others the Templars. None were stronger than Saladin, none were more numerous, but they all carried one thing: faith, and before them, they raised the most sacred relic of all, the true cross, a fragment of the very wood from Christ's crucifixion. When Grand Master Odo of the Templars cried, "Oh, for God!" that tiny army ignited like a flame from heaven. November 25th, on the road between Ramla and Jerusalem, Saladin was leading his troops through a narrow valley. His army was stretched, divided, not yet in formation. And then it happened. The thunder of hooves roared from the cliffs above. "Crasher!" The Crusaders charged, falling like an avalanche into the gorge. Saladin had no time, no commands, no preparation. The wrath of the cross descended on him like the flames of hell. They say Baldwin IV couldn't even sit upright, but he rode, he lifted his sword, he led the charge like a ghost of holy vengeance. He said nothing, only motioned, and plunged straight into Saladin's army. The battle raged through the afternoon. Blood rained onto the sand. Muslim horses fled in terror. Pillagers became prey. Saladin was nearly captured. He escaped only by mounting his fastest camel and fleeing into the desert, and Baldwin, though his body shook from pain, did not retreat. He ordered the pursuit. He stood in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by blood and corpses. Montgisard, just a name, until that day. From then on, it became legend. A tiny army, just a few hundred, shattered one of the strongest forces in the known world. A teenager with leprosy stopped an empire, a victory no one dared to dream. No one thought was possible, but it happened. For faith, for Jerusalem, for a king who refused to die in bed. From that day on, Saladin, a man who had never known defeat, carried one name with him, even into his dreams: Baldwin IV, the undefeated Leper King of Jerusalem. After the crushing defeat at Montgisard, Saladin withdrew his army to Egypt. He did not cry. He did not scream. He said nothing, and began preparing for something that none of his enemies ever lived to see twice: a counter-strike. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Baldwin IV still wore the crown. Still, they called him king. But with every passing day, his body was decaying. The leprosy crept from his hands into his joints, up to his face. No one dared look into his eyes too long. No one dared shake his hand, not out of fear, but out of sorrow. And yet, it was Baldwin himself who never pitied his own fate. He knew Saladin would return, and when he did, he would come with the force of a desert storm. So, amid festering wounds and relentless pain, Baldwin made a decision to build a new fortress. Its name was Jacob's Ford, on the Jordan River between Syria and Galilee. A thorn shoved straight into the throat of the Islamic Empire. Saladin understood this. He sent envoys to Jerusalem, offering 60,000 dinars, just to make Baldwin stop. The Leper King refused. Saladin raised the offer to 100,000. Baldwin still shook his head. Nothing could buy his will to defend the holy city. And so, war began again. June 1179, at Marj Ayun, Saladin struck back without warning. The Frankish army, fresh from a small victory, was resting, collecting spoils. No formation, no defenses. Saladin descended like fire from the mountains. Odo, Grand Master of the Templars, was killed. Many nobles captured. Baldwin, now too weak to ride, had to be carried off the field by his knights in a whirlwind of chaos. From the glory of Montgisard to a stretcher carried by 4 men, his vision blurred, his arm useless, his skin rotted so deeply that even the lightest touch made him cry out in pain. But Saladin didn't wait. He marched his full army to Jacob's Ford, and in just 5 days the fortress fell. The soldiers inside, even those who surrendered, were butchered or sold into slavery. Jerusalem had lost its northern defense. Hope began to collapse. Villages near Galilee evacuated in panic. Baldwin could barely even hold a sword. And yet, he still returned to the field, blind in one eye, unable to sit upright. no longer able to eat solid food, surviving only on liquids. His legs were so deformed. His attendants had to bind his knees with wood and leather to keep the bones from breaking. Still, he gave orders. Still, he received diplomats. Still, he prepared for a final confrontation that everyone thought was suicide, because Baldwin knew the truth. Saladin had been reborn. His new army was even larger than at Montgisard. And this time, he wouldn't retreat. There was only one goal now: the holy city, Jerusalem. And only one question remained. Can a man who can no longer stand stop the war horses of a god of war? The year was 1183. The mighty fortress of Kerak stood tall amid the desert of Moab, a bastion dividing Syria and Egypt. The only lifeline for Saladin's armies to move troops and supplies. To hold Kerak was to split the Muslim Empire in half, and the man who held it was none other than Reynald de Chatillon, Baldwin's most trusted, yet most reckless ally. But Reynald was a wild man. He cared nothing for treaties, respected no oaths, and this time he shattered the truce by attacking a Muslim caravan during the holy month of Hajj. Among the travelers was Saladin's own sister. It was the final straw. Saladin swore before Allah he would burn Kerak to the ground and erase Reynald's name from the maps of the Holy Land. In November of that year, 30,000 Muslim troops marched upon Kerak. War drums thundered across the valley. Giant catapults were assembled. Flaming arrows lit up the night sky like falling stars. Inside the fortress, a wedding was underway. The son of a Frankish noble was marrying Reynald's daughter. The bride was crying. The mother clutched her child. Guests screamed in the shelters below. The chants of the Quran echoed with the cries of terrified children. Kerak had become hell, and just as everyone knelt in desperate prayer, a message struck the gate like lightning. "The king is coming!" Baldwin IV. By now, he was completely blind. His limbs twisted and mauled by disease. He had to be tied to a stretcher with leather and bronze cords. And still, he led an army to rescue Kerak. No one believed it, until a tiny force appeared on the horizon. Through the desert haze, the cross banner flapped in the wind, and there, on a stretcher, among the knights, was a body that no longer looked alive, but the dry eyes still burned with unbreakable will. When Saladin heard the news, he was stunned, not afraid, but speechless, a king on the brink of death, without hands, without feet, unable even to speak clearly, had returned to the battlefield. Saladin gave the order. Retreat. The siege of Kerak ended, without a single sword being drawn. They say, when Baldwin reached the gates of the fortress, the people wept. The guards threw down flags in gratitude. The bride, once sure she would die on her wedding day, knelt at the king's stretcher and whispered, "God sent you. You didn't die. The kingdom still stands," and Baldwin just nodded. He said nothing, but the effort took its toll. Returning from the field, his health collapsed. His bones began to bleed through the skin. Doctors were helpless. Priests began preparing for the funeral. But Baldwin refused to die because he knew, before he met death, he had one last task: to pass the crown to someone worthy. The year was 1184. Baldwin IV was no longer a king. He was a living corpse, wrapped in linen, soaked in herbs, and hoisted upright every morning with bronze chains, just to keep his body from falling apart. But Jerusalem still needed him, and because of that, he was not yet allowed to die. Baldwin knew he could no longer ride into battle, but he still had his mind, and one final task: to choose his successor. The enemies at Jerusalem's gates were not the only threat. Inside the city, noble factions had begun to emerge, each one clawing for power, each one wanting their man on the throne, and the most dangerous among them was Guy de Lusignan. Guy, handsome, young, husband of Sibylla, Baldwin's sister, a French noble who had never spilled blood for the Holy Land, but whose ambition knew no end, while Baldwin lay paralyzed in bed. Guy began issuing orders. He summoned soldiers, punished towns that defied him. He nearly started a war with the Kingdom of Tripoli, Baldwin's oldest ally. From his deathbed, Baldwin screamed in silence. He could not yell, could not rise, but inside him, the fire still burned. And so, for the last time, Baldwin gave a king's command. Strip Guy of his rights. A royal edict was issued. Guy de Lusignan was removed from the line of succession, and the crown was placed instead on the head of a child not yet 6 years old, Prince Baldwin V, the son of Sibylla and her first husband, a child to inherit the crown of a dying man. No one believed the boy would survive the winter, but Baldwin IV did it anyway, because he knew. Better a child without sin than a traitor on the throne of the holy city. But the race against death was ending. The leprosy had reached his heart. Baldwin could no longer see the sun. Every breath bled through his nose. His teeth were gone. He could no longer chew food. And yet, every day, he forced himself to rise, to sign documents, to direct his generals, to keep Jerusalem from collapsing. Then, on a cold morning, early in the year 1185, his servants found him lying still. No breath, no pain, just a smile. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, was gone at the age of 24. No grand funeral, no army marching behind his coffin, only a handful of loyal knights, and the people of Jerusalem weeping in silence. They buried him in the church of the Holy Sepulchre, the same place where he once knelt before the true cross, on the eve of Montgisard, and on his tombstone they carved just one line: a warrior of God, a king who never surrendered. But the death of Baldwin IV was not the end. It was the beginning, because the man he once warned about, Guy de Lusignan, was waiting in the shadows. And Saladin would return with a bigger army, a fiercer vengeance, and a single purpose: to reclaim Jerusalem. Jerusalem, just 2 years after Baldwin IV died. His kingdom collapsed. Why? Not because the Muslim armies were stronger, not because God turned his face away, but because of one man, Guy de Lusignan, the same man Baldwin had stripped of power, had seized the throne. Thanks to the palace coup orchestrated by his wife, Sibylla, and the moment he became king, Guy tore up the peace treaties with Saladin. He gave full military control to Reynald de Chatillon, the man who once enraged Saladin by insulting his sister. Reynald didn't wait. He attacked a Muslim caravan near Kerak, slaughtered the merchants, took prisoners, and killed even the young child of Saladin's sister. This time, Saladin would show no mercy. He swore, "I will not rest until Jerusalem kneels at my feet." May 1187, Saladin mobilized his forces from Syria to Egypt. 50,000 troops, war horses, camels, elephants, all marching north toward the heart of Christendom. Guy, Reynald, the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the remaining Crusader knights gathered at the fortress of Sephari. There, they faced a choice: stay and defend the water supply, wait for Saladin's supplies to run dry, or leave the water behind and march to relieve Tiberias under siege. Veteran commanders urged, stay. But Guy chose to march, out of pride, out of ego, and under Reynald's whispering tongue. July 2nd, 1187, the Crusaders marched under 45 degrees Celsius desert heat through waterless hills, and Saladin was waiting. He set fire to the fields ahead, letting flames and smoke roll towards the Crusaders. Soldiers collapsed in thirst. Horses died mid-trek. Even the tents caught fire. Morning of July 4th, the Battle of Hattin began. Saladin surrounded the Crusaders between two volcanic hills. No water, no escape, no reinforcements. Inside the circle, Guy ordered a desperate charge. Reynald led the cavalry straight into the Muslim line. They were all slaughtered. Saladin tightened the noose. He burned more grass, unleashed volleys of flaming arrows, smoked out the Crusaders. They couldn't see, they couldn't breathe, they couldn't flee. That afternoon, the army of Jerusalem was destroyed. More than 20,000 men lay dead. The Templars beheaded one by one. Guy de Lusignan captured alive. Reynald brought before Saladin himself. Saladin drew his own blade and beheaded him with his own hand. He spoke, "I swore I would kill you myself, and Allah has granted me the chance." The cross fell. The true cross, sacred relic of Christianity, was seized by Saladin, and Jerusalem was left unguarded. October 1187, Saladin marched on the holy city. No Baldwin, no reinforcements, no miracle. Only citizens, trembling in churches, nuns holding hands and praying. They knew what might come next, but Saladin did not do what they feared. He did not slaughter. He did not burn churches. He did not torch the city. He let them live and offered them the chance to buy their freedom. Jerusalem had fallen, and Europe trembled. When Pope Urban heard the news, he collapsed in tears and died. 3 days later, the end of an empire, the end of an era, and the final warning that when glory is not protected, it will fall into the hands of those who deserve it more. Jerusalem was gone. The church bells that once echoed through the valleys had fallen silent. The cross once held high, now lay buried in dust and ash. But the story didn't end there. After the defeat at Hatton, all of Europe awoke. The great kings, Richard the Lionheart, Frederick Barbarossa, Philip Augustus, drew their swords and swore to march, not just to reclaim land, but to reclaim honor for a man who fought with only half a body, but carried in his chest a heart twice the size of the world. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, the last torch of Jerusalem, the man who endured unimaginable pain just to keep the true cross standing in the storm. He died at only 24 years old, with hands wrapped in bandages, with a face ravaged by disease. But inside, a flame burned bright that nothing could extinguish. Ideals, freedom, faith. In every battle, Baldwin never retreated. He rode with his left hand, held his sword in the right, even when that hand could no longer feel. When asked, "Why don't you rest? Why don't you withdraw?" he simply replied, "If I do not stand on the front lines, then who will protect my people from hell?" And Saladin, even he respected the man he once fought. When news of Baldwin's death reached him, Saladin ordered prayers for his soul and forbade his soldiers from mocking the dead. To the warrior of Islam, the Leper King of Jerusalem was not an enemy. He was a symbol that you don't need a strong body to be the strongest. You don't need to win every battle to be a true victor. You only need to never bow to fate. Jerusalem had fallen, but Baldwin never bowed. His body faded, but his spirit was carved into stone, etched into the wind, and flowed through the blood of every man who ever knelt at the gates of the holy city. The Third Crusade that followed was the clearest proof that even the smallest man can spark a storm. From the Leper King, even the mighty Saladin stepped carefully. From the shattered walls of Jerusalem, faith grew back like wheat after drought, and from death itself, a legacy was born. This is not the story of a leper. It is the epic of an age. And if anyone should ever ask, how did a 13-year-old boy with a deadly disease stand against one of the greatest generals in history, you answer, because he believed in something greater than life itself. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, Saladin, the unifier of Islam. Two souls, two faiths, one collision that changed the course of human history.